EMDR and the pandemics, 10 months of interventions. Welcome back to this marathon to analyze what's happened and how the EMDR Association in Italy is sharing the experience together with what is to be coded as a good practice to tackle the phase 2 days without hopefully having to tackle a phase 3. After an overview of the most impacted territories in phase 1 and 2, we are going on with Giada Maslovaric, who's going to get into the details of how we can contact or come in contact with the people who are experiencing the pandemic, how we can support them. Good morning. In hospitals, what are the people who need psycho-emotional support directly? Good morning, everyone. Federico, maybe the right question would be, who are the people who do not need emotional support in hospitals? Intuitively speaking, we can think that the health operators involved in the first line who see suffering directly in critical areas are those who require most emotional support, supporting those who support. However, if we think about the very same concept, the word pandemic brings with it, it means pan, everything, demos, the population, so particularly the population. It is even more within each single corner of the hospital, health operator, health workers, the people in charge of cleaning, because if you work in a hospital independently on your role, they all have an impact with the virus, also from a psychological point of view. So who shouldn't we support? We psychologists included, so all the people who work inside some situations that are actually already witnessing pain, suffering. Also, the person who's around just cleaning the floor, everyone deserves support and help. So, of course, doctors, nurses, health workers, but let's not forget about all the other people. Let's just think about offices that move people, doctors and nurses, from one ward to another to answer the different needs, and we to meet the different needs. And we know that some health operators have fallen to COVID. Some were very serious cases. Some died. People who were in the offices who actually decided to move these people. So how are these office workers? Federico, I think I would change your question and revert it. So who does not need an emotional caress and a support during this pandemic, not to feel alone and to help find their own resources day after day, wave after wave? Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you, but we can now count on your help to see and hear direct witnesses getting into the details. It is now beautiful to think about the people who seem so far away from the front line, but those who make the decisions that have an impact on the front line. And this distance, however, does not avoid traumatization, maybe even in a worse way compared to those who can fight the pandemic with our own weapons. Exactly. Some emergencies, in this case, the pandemic, particularly in the first phase, well, it was really very much overwhelming. It overwhelms us at the beginning. If you have more technical competencies, you have more tools to cope with this wave. Other people who are, however, within the hospital walls, maybe holding decision-making positions, they are not in the ICU or a COVID ward. However, they are charged with making the decision on how to optimize the health operators in the hospital. So the decisions they make have an impact, a very important impact. And of course, they've also had impacts on the health of the health operators who unfortunately fell ill. Inside hospitals, there are several dynamics underway, and this regards us as specialists in emergency psychology, psychotraumatology. We must have an extended view of the situation. We are not only going to actually help those in the first line, but we must help the whole hospital. The whole system is injured. No one's accepted. And in this, when I'll try to actually explain what we are doing, I'll try to show some testimonies so that we can get more and more into the injuries and into how to treat these injuries, how to better react to what has overwhelmed the hospital realities. Now we have more and more skills. We as psychologists, this is the second wave for us too, doctors, administrative clerks, nurses. We are much different compared to the past. So this allows us to actually go for something different. Okay, let's go through that then. Okay, just go on. Okay. Our journey together is going to be a journey inside hospitals. We'll try to go through them, always trying to understand what's behind them. So, hospitals in the time of COVID-19. How did hospital psychology answer to the pandemic? We have answered in a different way compared to what we did before the pandemic. Some offices already had teams of hospital psychologists to tackle emergencies and to support the departments, the wards after a critical event. This meant that some hospitals already had micro teams dedicated to the emergencies. Other local healthcare areas use the existing teams to answer in a specialized way to the pandemic. In other hospital situations, they decided to devote contracts or hours specifically involving professional psychologists that could help tackle the sequelae of COVID-19. In some realities, we'll see some outside psychologists from the EMDR Italy Association joined to support the hospital staff. Our contribution as EMDR Association in hospitals actually touched on different issues and modalities. It started as an in-presence and online support to hospitalized patients. We've had interventions to support the families of COVID-19 patients, and we'll see later how we accompanied them through grief, which was so distant in the case of COVID-19. So we'll have some indications on how to tackle this moment of great suffering. Many efforts were made to support those who support, hence to support the health operators, and even more, another important effort we tried to perform together was support to health operators who were COVID-19 patients. So, and after, what's going to come after the acute phase? In many hospitals actually set up a specific COVID-19 psychotraumatology clinics and units for patients, families, and health operators with a specialized training on psychotraumatology, emergency psychology, and EMDR to support the hospital psychologists. To talk about the contribution by the EMDR Italy Association inside a hospital, which, as we saw, occurred through different modalities, I think that the best testimony telling us how the hospitals impacted by this COVID-19 got reorganized, reacted, and integrated and valorized the part of psychology. We know that since 1977, the WHO has been telling us that health is not just the absence of disease, is biophysical, psychophysical, and social well-being. This pandemic, in this pandemic, the psychosocial part has taken up a major fundamental role. To tell you something more, we'll get into a first local health area with the head, Dr. Enrico Frisone, who gave us his testimony. Let's see if I can start it. Sorry. But as we were saying before, in COVID times, we need to... Oh, there it is. Okay, there we are. I'm Enrico Frisoni, the head of the local health area of the province of Lecco. This COVID experience generated several critical moments. What I remember best was the one when one evening we closed our day in doubt, unable to know what would happen the following day. All our hospitals were full, all ICU beds were occupied, and the territory could not give any answers to the people. It was just a moment, followed by confrontation with the operators and the different coordination functions that were helping us day after day. However, this has taught us a lot. This moment, this situation, they taught me personally to valorize, believe, and push the people to give an answer, to react, to express all their potentialities that they kept hidden or which they had forgotten for some time. As a man and as a person, this opened up a whole new world, which is the others who were suffering, like we saw, as we saw in the on the television, a difficult, invisible enemy. And on the other side, we'll do that. Rhetorical sentences that just hid a major question mark for all operators. Will we really be able to cope with it? Last, what was the added value that generated in me as a doctor and as a human being this experience? That was the added value from operators through EMDR. It was possible to win over our own fears, to remove the question mark and to put an exclamation mark instead, an exclamation mark that allows us to go on now. Oh, probably the video stopped. I think we were deprived of the last sentence, but I think that the last sentence can come from, can be summarized from another thing he gave in his presentation, from the question mark, will we be able to cope with it, to an exclamation mark, we will be able to cope with it. This is what we are trying to do with the operators, feminist COVID patients, from question mark to exclamation mark. In this journey, there's a lot in terms of humanity and professional multidisciplinary skills. So that's why I really want to thank Dr. Frisone for his wonderful testimony. The timing, hospitals reorganized were different, some since February, some since March, others since April. They were all integrating specific interventions. Here in Gravidona, materials were produced, psychoeducational materials particularly, like here in the Gravidona hospital, as regards the possibility to support all the operators, and particularly being parents working during an emergency, thus contributing to a better personal family balance. Each hospital applied creativity to give something unique to this pandemic and to support operators during the pandemic. As a scientific association, EMDR is first a scientific association. We have tried to understand how, on this journey from the question mark to the exclamation mark, so how effective our intervention was. This is possible only by measuring the outcome of these interventions through a specific psychodiagnostic testing, to understand how operators are and how, through the EMDR groups for specific intervention to reprocess the post-traumatic stress part, could produce more centered and more solid people after all these repeated traumatic episodes they are experiencing at work. The tests used were the impact of event scale for post-traumatic growth, particularly. And as we'll see, the second question is, yes, we are different, but what have we learned? What are we learning from this all as people and as operators? As for tests, we integrated them into some hospital realities, like this one in Sondalo, where we added additional questionnaires. The psychologists, the teams of psychologists contributed by providing additional tests and points of view. Other interpretations. In this case, for instance, we decided to administer the general well-being questionnaire too, to screen the general well-being of operators in COVID times. A few figures from all these tests we've mentioned. Here we are taking the raw healthcare area as an example, where we had both EMDR interventions and other types of treatments on many health operators. As we see, for instance, the emotions barometer, anxiety, stress, mood, anger, sleep, help from the beginning, before the test, seeing operators before treatment, after the short cycle of 2 or 3 support sessions, all these indexes improved. In the same way, we see an improvement with other types of treatments. And this is particularly important. You see the IES, for instance, that specifically measures the post-traumatic stress level. Well, initially levels are really very high. What you see in the column in light blue, 45.16, is the average value at the beginning. We know that above 33 there's a possible PTS disorder. So people were really feeling very badly. Our support to those who support, as you see, could provide very good and meaningful results. Post-traumatic growth, as we are going to talk at the end of this presentation specifically, the most interesting figure is the one related to the relationship to the others. What I've learned the most, whereas a healthcare operator, I've grown as a person. What's most useful? The relationship to the others. Again, the relational aspect, looking into other people's eyes, inventing new ways to help people, and feeling not alone in this, because as you can see, this is the most important index, which is followed by thinking about new possibilities, value, appreciation for life that brings to post-traumatic growth. Some actions like going back home, hugging the own children. It is not so much taken for granted. This is turning into something much expected after weeks of self-isolation at home. But let's deep dive into the hospitals to try and understand how, as a professional category, as psychologists, we could really bring help in this moment of great suffering. Very little help, but very precious. We have developed special protocols in collaboration with the hospitals to better support both patients and families. Let's start from the use of tablets. Many many already know this use. We have heard about that on TV to allow communication between hospitalized patients and their families at home. However, this use must be meaningful. What do I mean by that? I mean, before using a tablet, you must get consent from both parties. Some people, COVID patients, do not want to be seen by their own families because they are in a condition which is very difficult for them. So you must prepare the patient from a psychological point of view. You must prepare the families. And possibly you must also tackle the possible emotional blocks in case of refusal, because they have the right to refuse consent. And we also have a number of intermediate solutions, because the patient maybe is a father, the pillar of a family, and he doesn't want to show so debilitated and so weak in that moment. We can ask whether he wants to go for an audio message, or if he wants maybe to receive a video message from his family so that he can see them while he is in the hospital during the very long time that patients spend there, particularly when they are obliged to actually use, for instance, like the casket we've seen in many pictures. These devices help them live, but they also isolate them even more. So our effort was to connect the patients with their own families. Another important commitment was related to the communication of bad news, particularly on the phone. And again, we have tried to provide a contribution as regards intubation and extubation procedures for COVID-19 patients. For us, EMDR psychotherapists, this is something very well known. This is the safe place procedure. Why did we decide to go for that? When awakening many COVID-19 patients during extubation, as sometimes happens in an ICU, patients had very intense reactions, delirium, deep anguish, and understanding at a differential diagnosis level whether that was delirium or whether that was deep post-traumatic anguish. Well, that was the starting point for us to try and go for some specific procedures during intubation and extubation that could accompany people in a softer way with emotions less connected to deep anguish, to support patients both during intubation and during extubation. A very critical moment when at a certain point a doctor verbalizes to the person the possibility that becomes a certainty that he or she must be intubated. This video talks about this. It talks about a patient, but a patient who is a doctor, from being a doctor to being a patient. So I want to really thank this doctor for this video, this testimony he gave us as regards his own experience from being a doctor, a surgeon, to being a patient in an ICU as a serious COVID-19 patient. As usually, I'm trying to launch the video, but I think that the pandemic has taught us to be patient, also with technology, and in fact, with some patients, we can have the video testimony. No, not ready yet. So some more patience, of course, we can. I'm Vincenzo. I'm a son. I'm a husband. I'm a father. I'm a doctor. I'm a surgeon. I've been working in the territory between Milan and Bergamo. During February, March this year, we were overwhelmed by the COVID tsunami. I and all my colleagues were all committed to trying to provide our contribution, together with much fear, particularly inexperience in coping with a disease we knew nothing about, particularly as regarded the treatments that could be beneficial for the patients. At a certain point, I was in the more complicated situation because I became a patient myself. I was in one of those beds that I had visited as a doctor until a few days before. At a certain point, I worsened, and I was told by a colleague of mine, and he told me, Vincenzo, we have no other possibilities. We must intubate you. Well, for a moment that is carved in stone in my memory, which is still alive in my thoughts, which I re-experience moment after moment in my mind. I think that was the only moment in my life when I was really scared. I will not do it. I might suffocate, and I knew that. Lots of things happened. I was in an ICU. Then I woke up at a certain point in a different hospital, surrounded by people I didn't know. So there were dynamics underway that I didn't know. I was a doctor anyway. But I still felt that fear incredibly. I felt alone, I felt desperate, and that situation does not abandon you. I feared that fear could have an impact on everything coming up after that moment, the impossibility of being a good son, a good father, a good doctor, particularly a good doctor. So the following days, one after the other, were characterized by this inability to put this experience aside as an experience I had lived, until I was suggested to approach EMDR. This would have turned for me into an advantage that would help me tackle the situation. It was difficult for me. I'm a surgeon. I believe in a form of medicine which is tactile, which you can touch and change. So the idea that such a procedure could have helped me, well, frankly speaking, I was quite skeptical in my approach at the beginning, but only at the beginning, only the idea, because independently on the professional who supported me, and I believe this professional was exceptional, I immediately understood how I had to reprocess this event. Vincenzo, we must intubate you. This event kept on drilling into my ears. It was a moment of infinite sadness, pain, anguish, re-experiencing it, reprocessing it, dividing it into its smallest parts, analyzing what happened before and what positively came out of that, because then I could be back to life. And this allowed me to be serene again. That is an experience. Okay, it happened to me. I have drawn a great advantage from that experience because this has brought me a lot. That moment has marked my life. That moment has marked whatever came after, but as an experience, no more with the anguish and fear I felt before. And this, of course, allowed me to be back to my ordinary life, to doing whatever I wanted to do in that moment, to be a son, to be a husband, to be a father. And particularly, I was willing to immediately restart my profession. That was like this. And I believe that EMDR has helped me make this path much quicker, much more streamlined, and much quicker. So today, I'm sure I am a different person. COVID has been and is an experience I'm living still now that is going to change my life and the life of all the others. But it is important to get the best from this, to provide things with the right meaning. Again, I want to thank Vincenzo for his great testimony. He has accompanied us through his worst moment. A colleague and a friend, by the way, informed him about the fact that he would need intubation, and you see the path he has gone through: recovery, rebirth, being different for sure, being marked by this experience, which is a past experience anyway. And this is the core of the EMDR support. We do not erase experience, but we help people leave the past in the past to unlock the present, to feel free, to live present time at our best, and also to plan for the future. And I believe this video shows this. I would also add something more as regards the psychological part, regarding a doctor experiencing such a complex situation. This is not only vicarious trauma, that is indirect trauma for the contact with patients. Health operators during the pandemic are also risking to become patients, so first-type victims, working in phase 1 without feeling safe as regards a possible infection. Well, this complicates all works. It creates fatigue, not only for a doctor who has this mission, ethical mission, to help the others. They always have the doubt that they can be vehicles for the infection, bringing COVID from the hospital to the family, maybe the parents, or to bring COVID to other patients. This possibility creates a great cognitive and emotional dissonance in health operators. And this has generated, particularly in the first phases, but in now too, this has made their work even more complex. We as psychologists can support these operators who, however, need sometimes very specialized support to go through these steps. Humanization, this is the key to both the disease and death. We really tried to all do our best to understand how to make this path the most human path, even though there's distance, even though there's isolation. This has been really the core of many of our interventions. That's why we have produced many materials to support psychologists, doctors, nurses, to accompany all these moments at best. This material, which we have produced, as we'll see, through the great contribution from the local health area from Lecco, it has turned into a material, this tree with the hearts, that has accompanied many patients and families in the gray moments of hospitalization. However, before getting to the worst consequence of COVID-19, that is death, let's talk about the farewell from the families to the COVID patients. We are here at Bassini Hospital, at the local health area in North Milan. They have devised a very nice protocol to make the farewell procedure systematic, so that families could say farewell to the own family members who had tested positive. The protocol was set up between one wave and the other. In the first wave, it was almost impossible to guarantee a last in-person farewell to the families. It was a very, very bad point in mourning and grief. But now, in this second wave, many hospitals are implementing specific actions to allow families approaching the patients in hospital in person. So, what's the protocol like? Phase 1, we offer to the family the possibility to take part in the farewell. So, depending on the possible irreversible clinical conditions of the patient, when there's a reasonable certainty that unfortunately the patient is running towards death, unfortunately, the doctor can start the farewell protocol. There's a phase 2 psychological preparation phase for the families before accessing the hospital for farewell. So for sure, checking the family's good health conditions, the interview with attending as always a doctor and a psychologist to explain the patient's clinical pain, preparing access to the critical area ward, anticipating how the patient may look like, of course, acknowledging the relative's emotional experience. So after signing the informed consent, we go on to let them wear full IPDs, and families are also prepared in this sense. So how will they feel inside the IPDs? Access to the patient's death, guaranteeing confidentiality and a non-invasive presence, of course. So allow physical contact if possible, accepting the request to remain alone with their loved one. Then removing all IPDs, and again a moment of confrontation between the team of the doctor, the psychologist, and the nurse on how to communicate death. Phase 3, after the visit to the patient, the family is always called on the phone in the following days by the psychologist, continuing the therapeutic relationship started before the death. Again, possible reference on the territory in case of problems with grieving. Altogether, psychologists, doctors, nurses, hospital psychologists, territorial psychologists, all together in a synergy to try and humanize and let families approach their loved ones in the hospitals in a condition of full physical and psychological safety. The farewell protocol, the farewell is followed by returning personal belongings. Personal belongings, again, here we have tried to make this into a very human moment without just returning personal belongings in a transparent bag with haste in a corridor in the ward. In the first pandemic wave, returning of personal belongings took place even many weeks after the death. In this case, quite often, personal belongings are returned only a few days after farewell. So, taking care in delivering the personal and intimate belongings to valorize the relationship the person used to have with the loved one and the experienced pain. A very strong, intense moment we have tried to take care of to make grieving easier. In the second wave, as we've seen in this image top right, it was possible to write, when returning personal belongings, a very personal message for the family. which was not possible in some local healthcare areas that actually got to hundreds of deaths every day in the first wave. Like here, the local healthcare area of Lecco, they devised returning of personal belongings in a very warm, human way, with some messages that were chosen by the very same emergency psychology team that had been set up after and for COVID-19. You see them here in this letter to accompany returning personal belongings. You read, "We were with Francesco till the end. He was not alone. The distance and time you have experienced in this situation shall not cancel the connection you have built in your life with him. Distant, however, so close. Always. The hospital team that was with Francesco during his days at the hospital. Small messages, human messages, to make these deaths a bit softer." Let's go beyond. Let's talk about the rites of passage. We psychologists know that rites of passage are very precious from one phase of life to the following one. These phases must be marked by rites of passage. These are sequences of ritualized actions characterized by a phase of separation, an intermediate phase, and then a phase when people come back into the society renewed by virtue of their new status. In the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, the people who have lost or are losing a loved one to the disease, unfortunately, experience the impossibility to bid farewell to the own loved one, even though now with the new guidelines we have been able to solve this. It is important to bid farewell, even collectively, to the people. Here's the experience of the local healthcare unit of northwestern Tuscany in Livorno, where in addition to the interventions on all the health operators in the hospital, on July 13th, they planned and completed a wonderful, very intense day with family members, health operators, and former COVID-19 patients. Here are the words. "We are carrying, and we will all carry, the suspended emotional load of these past months, with the names, faces, and eyes of the 163 patients we have had at our hospital, and particularly of the 54 who died, whose last messages we have witnessed for their loved ones. We are here today because we want to remember, for their families and for ourselves, that no one was alone." These are the words Luca Carneglia, the manager of the Livorno Hospital, used to introduce the event organized in the hospital garden, and as we said before, which was reserved to the healthcare staff, the former COVID-19 patients, and the families of those who could not make it. Rites of passage, community, people who meet back, who look into each other's eyes. We've heard about numbers, so many numbers, but behind numbers there are eyes, emotions, stories that are similarly different and which deserve to be told and shared. As we said at the beginning, some hospitals already had existing psychotraumatology clinics within themselves and some projects to support the healthcare operators after in-hospital critical events. This was a facilitating element to quickly penetrate the heart of support to operators, particularly in a COVID area. We are talking about Seriate, Reggio Emilia, and Palermo hospitals, for instance. To talk about Seriate, however, I would leave the floor to Dr. Gualeni, who is the person who was in charge of psychotraumatology clinic existing before the COVID pandemic, and who supported the people and the health operators in the own hospital seats. So Seriate, Alzano, and these territories and hospitals that were strongly impacted. Okay, let's train our patients to technology again, because I need to start the video. Federico, can you confirm? I don't think the video has started. No? Okay, so let's continue to train patients. Okay, probably we are ready now. Incredible, from the face. I'm the person in charge of the psycho. Oh, let's try again. Okay. I'm the manager of the psychotraumatology clinic in East Bergamo that was critical in the pandemic first wave. It includes the hospitals in Seriate, Alzano, Gazzanigo, Sarnico, and Lovere, a quite large area with 6 hospitals. The most critical moment was the end of February, in beginning of March for us, when we were involved directly. The dramatic requests for support came first from the management because they were worried we should help the staff. Staff at the time, however, were all overwhelmed, particularly by the need to do. That is why we said resisting to the tsunami. We had no time to reflect and think. So it was necessary to get organized, but this was complicated by our own fears as regards the management of the infection. My psychology clinic has a stress desk with a psychotraumatology clinic where we also use EMDR to help staff. So they knew how to work. But the problem was the number of requests. From 2015 up to February 2020, we treated 99 people in the staff, 30 cases of PTSD. In this period, we had a great increase. In 6 months, we treated 40 operators with individual sessions, the same as in the previous years, and 200 operators with debriefing groups. Currently, we are completing a screening on the 2 most impacted hospitals through the IES scale, which was participated by 250 more operators. In total, we have contacted 550 operators, more or less. We have activated hence 4 clinics in the 4 most important hospitals. If in the first wave we mostly worked on prevention, on before development of PTSD, or on managing the reaction to acute stress, in this second phase we are working on the most serious PTSD cases. As a man, I have learned all the human and professional limitations I have, but at the same time I also learned about the strength that comes from the group, which is required also to defend ourselves from what we were told in that time. We have generated moments of great collaboration between different professional figures. This was possible through the use of the EMDR technique too, that proved its appropriateness and effectiveness, and also proved in its tapping version to be also a relational technique. It was a useful tool to decode anguish, and also it was like also a hug for the staff. psychic contact that removes powerlessness, the assumed inability to act. Okay, we want to thank, of course, Dr. Gualeni for his great testimony. He mentioned all the emotional injuries of health operators, powerlessness, the perception of not being able to tackle something new, and particularly the emergence of new possibilities, new relational connections between the different operators. And talking more in EMDR language, which are the negative beliefs that Dr. Gualeni reported from his operators. They were injured, however, also supported and helped. I'm powerless, I'm incapable, I'm not worth, I didn't do enough. But throughout the process with EMDR, they changed into positive beliefs. I did all I could. I couldn't do more. I'm capable. I can do it. Reggio Emilia Hospital, another reality with pre-existing early psychological procedure in case of emergency, with an equipe including 5 EMDR psychotherapists. They immediately set up the emergency psychological team to tackle all hospital requests with a project we restart between the two waves to continue accompanying the people, the citizens, the patients and the families together with the health operators too. This is a drawing by a doctor from the COVID ward. He underwent group EMDR with the team psychotherapists, and as we see in quadrant A, the level of disorder as regards the worst part experienced from COVID-19, 0 to 10, 8, so a very strong level. It gets calmer and calmer. You start seeing flowers. In the end, in quadrant D, clouds with disturbance that gets down to 3. This happens in about 30 minutes of EMDR in a small group with the operators, as you see through a drawing. Palermo, too, two different realities. They already had psychotherapists and psychologists that were organized to tackle requests connected to psychotraumatology. So we are at Ospedale Riuniti and Villa Sofia Cervello, where EMDR Italy already had established a protocol for intervention starting a psychotraumatological ER since the end of 2018. This allowed Dr. Nigro as the project manager and the whole team to immediately start working in the COVID emergency. But not only that, Palermo has other excellencies. I'm talking about the clinic established back in 2009 for the treatment and care of PTSD. The manager is Dr. Angela Seminara, with the Palermo local health unit. So this is a specific clinic that in COVID times turned into a very quick response and skilled response as regards what was happening. Particularly, we are talking about the Partinico COVID hospital. And as you can read, several activities were started by the psychologists in Palermo to support doctors, nurses, and citizens. The last item is important: psychological support to young nurses who had been hired and allocated to the COVID hospital only a few days before, who had to tackle a burdensome professional and emotional load, notwithstanding their limited experience. In this sense, supporting these young operators probably allowed to access these words, the COVID words, a bit safer. Again, we have different examples of hospital teams that were established specifically for the COVID-19 emergency. We are talking about Mantua, where several actions were started as regards supporting particularly the health operators in a COVID area. And on this, however, having a look at a few figures, we said 33 was the level that showed a possible presence of PTSD. Well, these health operators in Mantua had an average level around 48, 50 score. After EMDR, luckily, this figure dropped to 19.5. But I want to leave the floor to Dr. Benlodi, who more than others can tell us what happened in his territory. Again, training your patients. Back there. Good morning. I'm Andrea Benlodi. I'm in charge of clinical psychology clinic in Mantua. During the first COVID period, we have experienced moments of great criticalities, and the hospital asked for our help as psychologists to work with the operators who actually showed very strong stress symptoms. So we met as a group. The group was a great resource because we shared experience and know-how to devise some guidelines. Hence, we decided to refer to the EMDR Italy Association. Some of you were already skilled in this sense, but we were not enough in terms of numbers to start interventions on very considerable, consistent numbers. We are talking about hundreds of operators. Against this situation, the association provided us with very precise indications and information, also training, guaranteeing tutoring activities too, and through interventions like stabilization, the identification, resource identification, the safe place, the installation of resources, just to mention a few, they guaranteed the possibility for operators and we ourselves to become resilient as regards critical situations we had experienced in the past. We were all able to work in a highly stressing context thanks to the new technologies without stopping our work, and this was paramount. Thanks, Dr. Benlodi, for his testimony too, of course. He talked about what has happened, and he also showed how virtuous actions were started in Mantua to support the health operators, but not only them. From Mantua and Dr. Benlodi, who had previous EMDR training, we are moving to another healthcare area in Lecco. Again, a crisis psychological team was established to cope with the COVID-19 pandemic. To talk about this project, I leave the floor to a colleague, Dr. Vittorio Rigamonti. He had no previous training in EMDR. However, with the whole team of psychologists from the crisis unit, we have accompanied each phase since last March within the Lecco area, providing support to family members, patients, health or operators, but also as in this wonderful testimony in the video, supporting also the patients who were already taken up, like adolescents. We know that unfortunately adolescents are not feeling that well. Attempted suicides have increased almost throughout all territories. So the local healthcare area of Lecco, particularly the child neuropsychiatry ward, has devoted special attention during the first wave to adolescents who were already referred to their services, those showing higher risk factors. However, to talk about Lecco, I now leave the floor to Dr. Rigamonti. Good evening. I'm Vittorio Rigamonti. I'm in charge of the psychology clinic in Lecco. I'll try to be short and actually relate about our actions during the period of the pandemic. First, I want to say that the pandemic has actually endangered all the system. As regards psychology, the most difficult moment was the initial one when the management asked us to set up a crisis psychological unit that was to quickly respond to a number of interventions to help people, families, and operators who were all overwhelmed by what was happening. And this was to happen from remote, of course. We had to support the people, but we always had to keep contacts both in presence and from remote with families, patients, and staff, supporting families who maybe were not able to bid farewell and so on. One more difficulty was to keep tension awake in a time that was totally unexpected. This was supervised for free by the EMDR Italy Association through Dr. Maslovaric, whom I and we all want to thank. I will try to give you a few lessons. What did I learn as a person and as a doctor? Well, I was involved as a person first and as a professional later by the pandemic. I was also disoriented. Our ordinary way of living life have been totally changed. We have lost our ordinary contacts. It was very difficult to tolerate. I have learned how we should work in an emergency situation, so in normal times. Being able to work like this in our situations is definitely not easy. And being able to work as we did in the end was nothing so trivial. I also want to say we were able to stress how important it is to take care of our own health operators, because their psychological balance is not secondary. In hospital terms, this has a tangible, concrete effect. We have tackled this work with the supervision and with the technical actions of EMDR. I want to say that my EMDR knowledge is only scientific and not practical. However, during this crisis, the EMDR method did not represent an added value, but in our own reality, that was the very clinical core which deployed all interventions. Why? First, because EMDR creates packed interventions providing a specific procedure during interventions. Second, it is a method that allows to work on small groups, and this also allows including people experiencing the same situation within a small group, and last but not least, which is why EMDR is recognized by the WHO as a program for humanitarian support. It is a method that works on the trauma transversely, independently on the person who is experiencing it. These aspects are those that, in my experience as the person in charge of psychology, brought EMDR to be so effective, specifically inside the health emergency we have all been impacted by. So thanks to Dr. Rigamonti for his testimony, particularly for his contribution and his underlining how important it is to keep an eye on the health operators' health on the long run, because that was, again, a complexity within a complex moment, living for long in these moments of high elicitation for a period of time which was not to be determined. Pandemic waves, transformational waves. I'm mentioning here the Franciacorta area, where several actions were started during the first wave. As you can read in the slides, we had a phone help desk for operators between March and April 2020. We had a peak in the number of phone calls supporting the citizens, which was followed between the first and the second wave by a training course trying to learn how we can better answer this pandemic to reach the operators who have been overwhelmed by this event. In this case, a very important action was that of training between one pandemic wave and the second one, a group of peer supporters. As you see in the picture top right, health operator comforting a health operator. People who work together in the first line with just touching or an eyes gaze, they can understand each other because their mirror neurons immediately fine-tune with the other. That's why in Franciacorta area, we organized a training course for 31 peers, doctors and nurses, who followed a specific training course to get more skills in terms of emotional support in the wards, so that they could really act like bridges in requested psychological support against 11 in group interventions in the first wave. In the second wave in the Franciacorta area, these peer supports activated 24 short EMDR groups, over the half. The health operator in the ward as an antenna as regards the emotions experienced inside the ward, and as an element to accompany a possible psychological support. And let's get to psychologists themselves. How are we ourselves as psychologists who are supporting others? How are the psychologists inside the hospitals in the first line? And here we are visiting Piacenza. We know Piacenza was unfortunately one of the protagonists in the first pandemic wave, and the emergency psychology team in Piacenza was activated on February 28th with many actions throughout all the phases. But I leave the floor to see together what kind of support to psychologists was given by other psychologists, what happened for the psychologists in hospital setting. Again, of course, with some patients And let's start then. Hello, I'm Paola Frattoli, and I'm the coordinator in the clinic for
sono uno psicoterapeuta di Milano e
emergency
l'EMDR mi ha dato l'opportunità
clinic
di
in
aggiungere
Piacenza.
queste
I'm
specifiche
Claudio.
competenze
I'm from the
all'Italia
EMDR
online
group
con
in
ricorsi
Milan. I work here with the colleagues of Piacenza. The most difficult moment was for sure the beginning last February, when our community was actually overwhelmed by the pandemic. We all felt anguished, confused. It was really very
sentivo che
strong.
c'erano tanti
I
bisogni
felt
perché avevo un'autorità
much
in
was
più, ma non
needed,
sapevo
and
come
I wanted
fare
to do
e la
more, but I
situazione mi ha
didn't
dato
know
l'opportunità
how. And the
straordinaria di poter
association
chiedere
provided me with an excellent opportunity to do more. Well, the group EMDR cycle we had as a team with Claudio. Claudio for us was really very important. He was an enriching element that allowed us to get to know ourselves much better as a working group. We felt accepted with our frailties, and we were also helped in finding back our resources, providing them, and sharing traumatic experiences, working on them
L'associazione mi ha
together.
permesso ancora una volta di sentirmi
The
parte di una realtà
association
più grande
allowed me to
e di
be
entrare in
part of a larger
contatto con
group
dei colleghi
and to
straordinari
come in
e
contact with
sentire in qualche
extraordinary
modo partecipe del
colleagues,
loro lavoro.
thus feeling like I was participating in their work. Working from remote was quite strange at the beginning. We had to get used to it, but I must say that it was also an opportunity because it allowed us to watch into each other's eyes without face masks, working in a fully safe environment. Claudio was able to create a moment of welcoming and
Online
intimacy
ha
too.
permesso di fare un qualcosa che semplicemente
The
per me è stato
online
difficile
sessions allowed us to do
su una rete
something that would have
diversa da
never
cui
been
poi
possible
condividersi,
otherwise. It's not
ma
the same as
permette di
a
fare un intervento in
personal
totale
meeting, but it
sicurezza
allowed us
e
to
Paola e tutti i miei
provide
colleghi mi hanno
for
accolto
a safe
in
intervention.
ospedale
Paola
nei loro
and
studi e
her
questo ha
colleagues
creato un
welcomed
clima
me in
ancora
their
più intimo
hospitals and
che mi ha
practices,
permesso di
and this
sentirmi
created
ancora
an
più
even more
partecipe della loro
intimate
realtà e del loro
climate
lavoro.
where I could participate in their own realities and problems. Particularly, EMDR allowed us to find emotional stabilization and to reprocess traumatic
I colleghi e colleghe
experiences
sono delle
through
persone
the recent
straordinarie
events
con tantissime
protocols. The
risorse
colleagues are
a livello
great with
personale e professionale,
important
mi hanno
major
gestito
personal and
dei livelli di
professional
traumatizzazione
resources.
inattenditamente
However,
molto
they
elevati
experienced
e
levels
questa
of
che si sono rivelati di
traumatization that were
grandissima
sometimes
generosità.
very
E in
high
questa situazione
because they
l'EMDR
spent
veramente è
themselves with
miracoloso
great
perché riesce in
generosity.
pochissimo
EMDR is
tempo
great in this
a far
sense. It
scendere lo stress e il
can
livello di traumatizzazione
really
vicario
drop
dalle molto
stress and
elevate
vicarious
senza
traumatization levels
psicologiche
from
che
very high
sopravvvengono
to
fino a portare
ecological
in
levels, or to
conseguenza
remove
in
it
questo è
and to
molto
bring
unico,
resources under the
veramente
spotlight.
arricchente
That's
e
why
gratificante
it
tanto per
is
il
a very
terapeuta quanto per i
enriching and
pazienti che ne
gratifying
beneficiano.
component for therapists and for everyone. I want to thank EMDR for the opportunity, Claudio, Michaela
Grazie di
Barnato,
cuore
Giada
a Paola e ai suoi
Maslovac, and
colleghi
all the
dell'associazione
Italian
Michaela,
association.
Giada e
Thanks to
Isabel per il
Paola, the
supporto anche
colleagues,
per questo.
Michaela, Giada, Isabel, the association, all together for their support. And of course, I want to thank Dr. Frattoli, Dr. Sessa Vitali, Claudio for their contribution. Again, to let you understand how everyone can contribute to supporting others. An external EMDR therapist, in this case, can support the people inside, psychologists inside a hospital, who can then help the people in the ward to better support families and patients. But let's get more and more into direct traumatization of healthcare operators. That is, let's get into hospitals and let's see those who were COVID positive. Again, to talk about this, I leave the floor to those who can tell us what's happened. Again, back to Lecco to talk about support to COVID positive staff. I'm a psychologist, psychotherapist in Lecco. Since the beginning of the emergency, the psychologists got together and they established a very important group. In March, I got COVID positive. I continued working from home, supporting colleagues from remote, and they were getting organized in a crisis unit. When I should be back, because I was negative again, some major difficulties came up and I had to stop. It was not easy. Working in an emergency setting was like imperative for me, and for some moments I thought I had become fragile, unable to accompany my daughter in her ordinary daily life. Direct traumatization and vicarious traumatization. As many operators, I experienced being a victim, being hit at several levels. I kept on participating in EMDR group sessions, and I also asked individual EMDR support. Each meeting was like a journey to transform very painful moments into new ideas that could better adapt to my new life, able to generate, however, also to see how it was possible to use resources which I thought would have been zeroed down by the lockdown I was experiencing with my little daughter Agnese. When I left home to go to the hospital, I just looked around. Every time everything had changed, just like I was changed. I was injured but new. During one of these days, I devised a project for COVID positive staff, thinking that it would be positive if we all could feel new, regenerated, and transformed. The challenge of this project was, what can I learn from COVID, from the COVID that had made me a victim too? A theme of EMDR therapists from Verona accepted to adopt all the staff from the local healthcare unit in Lecco to follow them if they required psychological support. I was starting to feel better, not physically, but because I started thinking I could invent new ways to play with Agnese, to let her fall asleep without singing my nursery rhymes and remaining breathless, to be close to all the operators from remote, even though I could not be there in presence. A fairy tale helped me. It was written by Chiara Bini, which Roberta Invernizzi, a colleague, had suggested me. She was using it with the health operators to recreate bonds that had been broken by their long isolation. That it was possible for me to feel again my connection to Agnese that had been broken by my frailty. We've been back to dreaming together. Now, this has been part of my work, my projects. For a few days now, this has turned into a book too. I have started painting again, and with this, I have started the distant, however close project with a group of artists who are part of this arts group. Inside this project, I have painted my dream for a ward in our hospital. Unfortunately, the first wave left room for a second wave, and the sensation is that everything is being repeated. But we are different, we are patient, and we have started again. This is what I learned, not only during the months of disease, what I have lost, the friends I have found, but particularly my work at the hospital with the doctors, the nurses, the healthcare workers who have given and are giving all their humanity and time to help us and accompany us. The same is what I did together with my colleagues, trying to support those who support us, helping to transform tiredness, exhaustion, pain, fear into an occasion to look through injuries and change them, discovering that even though we are broken, we still have the color to draw and dream in our days. I really want to thank Dr. Elisa Fogliati for her testimony. I think it is really complete and it does not deserve additional words. Very quickly, because I know I'm running out of time. So I'm heading towards the end of my presentation, reminding you of the creativity of the tools we've used. Sometimes we've gone with the person in presence or remote EMDR. We are here in Trieste. There are some operators in a hospital. The colleagues from EMDR are in a different hospital. And from hospital to hospital, it was possible to provide the group EMDR intervention that brought to excellent results and excellent reprocessings like those you see on the screen. Flexibility and creativity also in terms of psychoeducation. This healthcare operator has a handy in his hands. It was very quick, 12 hours long shifts. That was the only way to reach the people directly onto their WhatsApp account in English, in Spanish. Our contribution actually was translated into different languages and different nations. And then we have a specific contribution in specific words, like the experience at the nephrology unit at Bassini Hospital, where the most interesting aspect, which we saw, is that specific post-traumatic indexes drop in treated people, while they worsen in the operators who were not treated and supported in the first phase. And as you see again, some growing sentences, post-traumatic growth, that leads us to the end of this presentation. Again, Florence here, the ICU and the ER at Santa Maria Annunziata Hospital, with a wonderful intervention in a ward where there was no psychologist, but our psychologists were then part of this community in these wards, also in the events organized in summer in the square, to thank for the contribution by all the healthcare workers. I've left some references, of course. These are two scientific articles already published also in English, where we talk about support to health operators, and also the group EMDR book we have cared for. And now the end of it. So post-traumatic growth, positive changes following trauma. Specifically, post-traumatic growth is defined as a subjective experience made of positive psychological changes as a result of a traumatic experience. To talk about this and furthermore, post-traumatic growth art and EMDR, I leave the floor to Roberta Invernizzi as the last precious contribution to understand how together we can head towards new well-being and growth. I'm Roberta Invernizzi. I'm the psychotherapist using EMDR. I work in Lecco in a neuropsychiatry ward for infants and adolescents. When the pandemic hit us, our services, territories, and hospitals, with other colleagues, we set up a crisis unit that was coupled with the one in our area. We have immediately worked with the EMDR Association and Isabel Fernandez and Jada Maslovaric. Art, drawing, painting, these were some actions we shared, using them as bridges between inside and outside, between families and patients, together with a sentence that translated the drama of the moment, distance, however, so close. My sister designed the first logo, the humanized death, small sentences, short sentences, a farewell that we used to print on this, taking care of the last farewell where other forms of closeness were not possible. And then the very same logo given to the family members together with the personal belongings of their loved ones. Then one of our colleagues, Elisa Fogliato, who was also COVID positive, designed the second logo, changing the colors of the backdrop. This logo has accompanied many histories of connections between patients and family members. Pictures and messages from the family members were printed here and put close to the patients, safe places that helped us during extubation. We have delivered these logos to the EMDR association that brought them into Italy and the world where they were needed. We know that each form of art is generative, even when it gives words to pain. So our children also drew their pain to make hospitals much happier. Masterpieces came out of that. Through Elisa, we were able to get to know a group of artists from the Il Tempo dell'Arte group with people from all ages. They were working with Irma Zarboni, an artist who was keeping courses. The connection was immediate. We have delivered words to the artists, distant, however, so close, and they started painting for our injured hospitals, a painting for each ward where we were supporting colleagues through group meetings with EMDR, from the wards to the chemists, the church, the clinics, all the people, doctors, nurses, and workers, even the obituary. Another bridge between inside and outside. Around the paintings, you can find the sentences connected to post-traumatic group that were processed in the groups. Now, too, during the second emergency wave, Elisa, too, has painted. Each artistic work translated a personal condition and a universal condition as well, as this pandemic has taught us to do. The artists that painted during the first lockdown had to tackle the difficulty to find their own materials, using sometimes recovered or recycled elements. That's why they activated their creativity using even fragile and poor materials. Sometimes they had to use different food oils because they could not find the oil for their own colors. Hence, materials became a metaphor for what we were lacking. They are the voice of a visible trauma that has hit us all. Some works are not finished, but they are beautiful anyway. Their message is wonderful. The hope and memory we have tried to write down again in the time of a second emergency wave. We also have the music by Simone Cristicchi. This music is for us, for our hospitals, as a translation of our will to participate.
Ti sei mai guardato dentro? Ti sei mai chiesto del tuo desiderio profondo?
Have you ever wondered about your inner deepest dream and desire, nostalgia which is hidden within you? What does this mean?
Infinita pazienza di ricominciare.
This is the infinite patience, because we must restart. The courage to decide which side you want to be in, and injury becoming like room to go through. The marvel in your eyes when you look around, when you watch flowers around you. These are the things that are really important. These are the real things we can feel. The things that can stay with us. These are the things that are important. and the strength of those who can be there, the strength of our frailty that makes us better, being humble because you keep on learning, because you can sacrifice everything for love, the ability to think that it's not over, the dignity to go on with our own life. These are the few things that are important. These are the things that we need, the things that stay with us. These are the things that are important. We are the sense, the meaning, the doubt, the uncertainty, the truth, the awareness. We are everything and nothing. We are the future, the past and the present. We are just a drop in the ocean of time. All the universe in one fragment. We are what counts. We are what remains here. We are what counts. With this wonderful testimony, I leave the floor to Federico, and of course thank all the psychotherapists who have contributed, because we can go all together towards a new well-being. And my last thought, and thank you to the warriors that have fought with us and who are fighting, who will fight with us in this pandemic. Federico, the word for you. I really want to thank Giada Maslovaric. She has brought us into a journey that has showed much of Italy, letting us discover the important and true reactions of the people who were actually hit by the pandemic, however restored by EMDR. The key word I'm taking home here is this ease in collaboration, which seems evident in all these interventions. The ability of EMDR psychotherapists to easily come into contact, not in an invasive way, however, in a constructive way with everyone. Our marathon is not stopping here. We are going ahead, and we have one more testimony that can help us discover these interventions in these months of pandemic. So welcome to Dr. Michaela Barnato. She has connected with us during her emergency. We are also having a little surprise. Before leaving her the floor, I would like to have an introduction after the first two interventions we've had, telling us about what type of support could have been provided by EMDR Association to structured realities like municipalities. So let's see how you could dialogue. To now, we have talked with people who were in hospital settings, but when the institution is not simply or only devoted to health, but also has other duties, what happens? Dr. Barnato, the floor to you. Thanks, Mr. Luperi. First, I want to thank you and to thank all the people who are following us in this very important marathon, as you often said. Actually, you have already mentioned very important aspects to introduce my own intervention, and particularly the context our intervention is taking place in. Municipalities like hospitals are all involved in healthcare for the municipality. So all our activities are also in connection with them all. We must imagine that the mayor, the municipal authority, are in charge of mental health and also of the psychosocial context we are working in. As the colleague was saying before, the context, the scenario we have in front always orients our own interventions, but we must remember that the municipalities have this pyramid of needs we have to consider, in addition to the fact that for sure the municipality is also a place, even though symbolic, it is the place that represents all the citizens. So an intervention by the municipality has an enormous value because it symbolizes and represents the very same citizens. I'll get into the details of telling you about the interventions we've made with all the municipalities that have asked us to work with them at national level. Okay, great. We have already seen a large part of the territory. Now you are about to introduce the relationship to the municipalities. But what about if we go beyond that? Because the uncertain situation also contributes to make the situation even worse and stronger. What will we need after the pandemic? I see you are smiling. And I think I can say one thing. What I was impressed by you all, from Dr. Fernandez on to you, you have something in common. You are all smiling. You are restoring safety, but you also bring serenity, happiness. Will this be enough? Will a smile be enough? Well, in fact, what you are seeing is absolutely fundamental, not so much for our smiles, and I want to thank you for that, but definitely these are due to the fact that, of course, we've been working together with many colleagues. Isabel was talking about the 550 colleagues who supported, helped us, and accompanied us. Without them, we would never be able to do whatever we are doing at the moment. This is for sure helping us to keep smiling. The smile is also the same smile by the people we work with, and also thanks to post-traumatic growth, through which Giada closed her intervention. I'm seeing that we will need even more psychological support after the pandemic. This is something we have noticed, because if in the first wave somehow the municipalities and the people, all the citizens had asked for a support in very high terms, I must say that in the second wave, the answer, the response is much stronger. So we will have to be equipped knowing that requests for support will be higher and higher from all the citizens. So for sure, territorial services, specialized services will have a lot to do. We are getting equipped for that, also because many municipalities asked us to implement medium to long-term services. We know that when we intervene in an emergency, we usually move in the peri-traumatic phase, while later on we act on the territory. Many municipalities asked us to implement services that could go onto the medium to long term to take care of what this emergency is generating. Now, I think, as your colleagues before, I would leave you to presenting data and a summary of what you have experienced. So the floor to you, video and microphone. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Luperi. I'm very pleased for that. I'll try to be quick on that because I don't want to be boring or to tire you. However, I want to let you understand what is the context of reference we are moving around in. So it is important to understand what I said before, the term mental health and psychosocial support. That's the aspect within which municipalities are moving in the reference context. This is also used in all the guidelines of permanent interagency committees to describe all the supports, hence all the types of interventions that can be both local or external, and that aim at promoting psychosocial well-being and to prevent and treat mental health conditions. Why is it important to stress this? Because this is the framework we are moving in. We are acting, considering that the situation is more complex. In fact, we are saying that we must think that a number of levels of intervention appear in response to pandemics, and all these levels are levels we have to consider and which we have to respond to. As I said before, the mayor is in charge of the civil protection, so he has the burden and honor to organize all the interventions to support all these targeted actions. We must imagine like a pyramid of needs. At the bottom, the social ones, those referred to safety, while at the top we have more specialized interventions, including, of course, our own. The mayor, in his civil protection function, must organize all of them. And this is a great networking group. We must get into this all interventions, and we must consider that the people contacting us, asking for our help, all have these needs together. Another very important thing we have made is to legitimize what was happening, because quite often, let's think about the municipalities that were not in the red zone. But this does not mean that the citizens were not feeling the load, the stress, and the anxiety connected to what they could see in front of them. So as a matter of fact, we must always think that at the beginning, citizens found it difficult to come to us because somehow they didn't feel they were entitled to be provided support, because they were not patients, they had no patients among their relatives, or they were not in a red zone. Sometimes simply through psychoeducation, so by legitimizing what was happening, explaining that the pandemic and the emergency was a national problem, not only a problem for the red zones, then clearly many possibilities for support opened up where there was not a real need. Well, actually, the need existed, but it was not requested because they felt they were not legitimized. So the importance of a networking group. I remember 550 people who helped and supported us. Working with the municipalities, this is fundamental, because depending, of course, on how big the municipality is, with the municipality of Milan, for instance, we also had to create a great networking work inside the very facility, in addition to networking with all the other local territorial agencies that would take up the follow-up in the medium to long run, the so-called referring in English terms, to follow all the people whom we had followed at the beginning. In addition, we know that, as literature tells us, also thanks to what we can learn from research, in all epidemics, isolation produces a number of psychological disorders, including, of course, post-traumatic stress, confusion, anger, fear, insomnia, anxiety, depression. We'll see later which were the main reasons why people required our own support. However, research tells us that this is what we have to expect. And as expected, of course, in this pandemic too, the same happened. As a matter of fact, most patients tell us that they find it really difficult to give a meaning to what's happening and also to plan for the future. Just think, as Sagetzin was saying at the beginning, and Isabel was saying as well, during an emergency, we are used to having a beginning and an end. In this emergency, instead, we have an ongoing situation. So it is still on and on. There's no end we can see. It's impossible for us to understand the future scenario and to give a shape to our future. Well, that was part of the problem itself. I've given you here a map highlighting the different regions that mostly asked for our own activation. I'm sorry for the size of the dots. This doesn't mean anything, just that I needed to take a graphical course because I put them. I wanted to stress that because otherwise it could seem that some were less important that had requested fewer activations. No, the regions that had requested activations were particularly those in northern Italy because they had more important stressors. But as a matter of fact, there were also other regions who asked for activation. Particularly, we had 37 municipalities, some provinces. Then we'll also see the experience in the Monferrato area, where we had many municipalities that requested activations and that made a great networking, or Sicily, that actually started a quite peculiar experience because there was a spontaneous activation by a group of colleagues, not by the region, 37 colleagues that actually joined, all EMDR colleagues, they joined, they actually founded a Facebook page with other support means that they could be contacted through, making themselves available for all the population all throughout their region. A similar activation came also in the Campania region with the group of the colleagues from Naples. Now, I would leave the floor to a guest. In fact, we have a guest with us whom we want to thank for his patience. But before actually revealing him, I want you to remember one detail. The EMDR Association has worked for long with the municipality of Milan. Very recently, 12 days ago, on St. Ambrose Day, EMDR was awarded with the Ambrogino d'Oro Award in Milan, which is a major award which is assigned to people who have distinguished themselves throughout the year with their activity. Now, I see we have our guest connected. Here he is, Filippo Barberis, from Palazzo Marino, the municipal authority, the administrative municipal authority. I want to thank him for attending with us. I would like to hear from him in a moment and in a period of life like ours. Well, you know, I am a journalist, but I was particularly impacted by how stressed associations have been flexible enough to request psychological support, which is not so common for an administration. But there was the general ability to think about opening up new ways, new pathways. What did this support mean for the administration of a company so big as Milan is? Mr. Barberis. Thank you everyone for the invitation, and particularly thanks for your work in general, and particularly for the extraordinary work you have been doing throughout all these months. These were for sure major months when we had to tackle an emergency. Many have thought about a warlike scenario. We had to save lives, avoiding for hospitals to go upside down. But that was required. We had to do that by increasing awareness of the problems in our system and the problems in an approach which is not always integrated in terms of assistance to the person from the point of view of physical, mental health, and also social support. In this perspective, the attention of the municipality of Milan and of many other administrations, we have decided to work with associations like yours in view of an integrated attention. And in this awareness, sorry if I repeat that, in this awareness, a trauma that was being experienced at collective level, it was not only collective, it was also individual, with a number of sensations, feelings, emotions that were and are crossing through all our age and population brackets. The elderly are more fragile, were most impacted by the epidemics, but the consequences, even outside the hospitals, as regards stress, anxiety, the workload, uncertainty, well, they mostly hit women who had to do great things, particularly during the first wave, when the school system, the full school system, was blocked. From nursery schools to kindergartens, primary, secondary schools. However, always considering that they work in a city like Milan, where, even though the level is not yet enough, more women work compared to other areas in Italy. So where this conflict between assistance to the family and work is felt even more strongly when we are lacking the presence of an institution like school, which is so important. And I'm also thinking about youth. They have really suspended their in-person social life with a strong impact on their life habits, their affections, their relationships with the family and within the families. This is to say that as an institution, we know how deep this critical situation is getting within the families and within the single individuals. From this point of view, having an integrated approach, having the possibility to organize psychological support in a systemic way, well, this is something that strengthens attention to the citizen. This is the meaning of collaboration. And pay attention, I think the experience of these months, and unfortunately for sure that from the next months, will have to be at the basis of a post-emergency planning where attention to this integrated support is not something episodical, hence it goes off once the emergency is finished. It must become systematic within all social, psychological, and support systems. And I think the end of this, the summary of this, also relates to employment. We've had a suspension of layoffs in the latest months, and supports to unemployed people have increased. This is also a problem. even though using social security benefits, much is still to be done. Women and youth are suffering from this. I'm saying this only because we are going to tackle not only the pandemic and its aftermath, we will also have to take up the employment challenge and many more challenges. We need to help people reactivate, restart work, find a new work, which is not only bureaucracy, not only red tape. This requires an attitude. Mr. Barberis, I finished. No. In your explanation, I was impacted by the fact that you are interested in the single person as well as in the collective person, support for the single person and support for the citizenship, in meaning the group. Talking about this and talking about your personal way of being from Milan, do you think this experience is changing what? The perception of the single person in Milan? Till a few months ago, Milanese people believed they were leaders in the country. They have been hit strongly. People from Milan are trembling. Now, what does Milan think about itself, thinking about the post-emergency situation? Well, of course, I'm not talking for the whole population of Milan, but yes, you are in a position, you can hear and feel what's happening. Yes, my perception, because definitely this is the year, in all my years of experience at Palazzo Marino, where somehow we suspended our social and personal life, but we have worked 3 times more. And of course, we are happy for that. We have started relations with a number of sectors by macro categories. Our priority was, of course, the health emergency first, sanification, hygienization, material IPDs, disinfectants. Then immediately the food emergency, because some families had lost their income, and so they could not even buy food. And some of the sectors that had been hit, culture, school, trade, handicraft, tourism, sport, it was blocked until July in some sectors. We were plunged into this emergency, and thus this strengthened the relationship between the administration and all these components in the Milanese society. They have strengthened an already existing relationship, because one of the characteristics of the Milanese government model is an integrated DNA with public and private spheres in serving the public interest. And this cannot but strengthen ourselves also in view of the forthcoming months. I'm saying this as a context, not to elude your question. Now I'm answering. For sure, the feeling for our city that had been growing on and on for several decades, opening up to the world, a very positive sensation. The city is very complex, of course, so we are no paradise. We have several critical issues and points, but this growing tendency was quite clear. So we had a strong sensation that is, this status of growth and well-being is something you can lose. You can lose within short. And this brings in uncertainty, anxiety, even anger, particularly when these anger and uncertainty are connected to a sensation of powerlessness, inability to learn what's going to happen, to understand what's going to happen. We are in a phase where additional emotions come up, responsibility, because starting from the very first wave, Milan proved to be highly responsible. We had limited figures in terms of infections in the very first wave at the very beginning, because we were actually closed down everything. Now we are waiting for the vaccine, and along this, we would like to be able to build a new, more stable, expectable path towards growing again. These are going to be transition months, in my opinion, where we must help through politics and resources, services. We will have to help everyone. We want our autonomy back. We want to be independent. We have heard many people with stores, for instance, saying, we want to work. We don't want to keep asking for subsidies and helps. This is what many people from Milan think. So I'm seeing this transitional phase in the next months, where we will have to devise tools to soften the difficulties in the short term, starting a path to support Milan's growth. In the next month, we will also have to be based on our pride. Milan was hit, but it was not denatured. So this was exactly what I wanted to hear from you. Mr. Barberis, you are a lawyer, but I heard you talking about sentiments, feelings, sensations. Maybe today we can also make you become a honorary psychotherapist. I hope I didn't say any stupid things. Well, no, you have made our path richer. So thank you for your participation, your patience, and the contributions you have shared with us. Thank you all. And of course, my words. Well, I always try to give a goal to what we are saying. So the goal is to go on with this awareness, to continue collaboration, focusing on the people with all the tools we have available, starting from the ones you are offering, of course. Thank you very much, Dr. Barnato. Now, we have to go on working together. So, what do we have to do? Well, first, thanks to Mr. Barberis. As a matter of fact, he talked about several aspects we have dealt with and which we have felt as major. He talked about the health emergency, the food emergency. It's part of that reference context that I was describing at the beginning, within which we have acted. As a matter of fact, all the citizens we've talked to were suffering from that situation, and also the other things regarding women and youth. Yes, in the first wave, we had a total suspension of school activities in many schools, and for many schools, they did not even have remote school lessons. Everything was assigned to the parents. So being able to follow a school program, the first year of the elementary school, well, everything was assigned to the mothers and parents, but some mothers were also working at home, from home. So being able to put these two things together as a stress source, well, that was definitely one of the issues that were at stake, or also how to manage children and adolescents. Sometimes we witnessed hyperconnection. These youth were isolated at home, so parents asked us for some support in this sense, how to intervene depending on the age, the children's age. We provided different support in addition to support as regards the anxiety provoked by these people. On with my presentation, however, I wanted to say a couple of things on how our activity association is activated. So institutions usually send a letter to our association, to the secretariat, asking to receive this humanitarian support for the emergency underway. We and Isabel Fernandez first all answer, and then we start a number of paths that meet these requested activations. Why am I talking about paths? Because activations, particularly when we have to do with the municipalities and hence with the general citizens, we do not work whom we have in front, who is calling us. Sometimes it's health operators, because in not all hospitals they are having psychological support. In the red zones, of course, they paid more attention to that. But as a matter of fact, let's think maybe about smaller municipalities. These internal supports were lacking. So when we talk about citizens, we must remember that we can have different people in front of us, a health worker, a social civil society operator. Anyone can ask for our activation, maybe also to support those users that were maybe within residential communities. So let's say that the levels and different levels of exposure and traumatization were very different. So we must consider this heterogeneity of the demand, based on which, of course, we were proposing different interventions. How were we providing care? How were we taking care of the people who were asking for our help from remote? Of course, video or phone calls when possible to do that, when it was possible to do that, because sometimes we had to do with people who maybe were older, and so they were not really able to use video calls, even though I must say that during the first phase, and maybe this is also a post-traumatic growth, also taught this to many people who did not use video calls before as a way for communication. Interventions were all from remote, so individual, of course, because unlike the situation in hospitals where group interventions could be made, of course, here we were working only at individual level. And we provided materials to psychoeducational materials to all the municipalities. Some were shown by colleague Sacchezzini at the beginning. I also wanted to show more. This is very nice. It was produced by a film director from the municipality of Novara that turned into a video one of the psychoeducational materials we had produced with the Bergamo local healthcare area. Of course, we wanted the municipality of Novara to appear here. It's just 1 minute long, so it's nice to see that. Okay, I'll try again, hoping. Okay, there it is. Coronavirus, how to tackle it. Sorry, I have stopped it a few seconds before the end, but clearly the video was a symbol and was telling what attentions had to be taken for children, because psychoeducation was paramount for all the citizens, in addition to treating whatever was required, of course. We noticed a number of differences, as I said before, between the first and the second wave. In fact, in this second wave, requests for support by all citizens had greatly increased. In fact, whatever is happening is taking out all those pre-critical characteristics that this wave, which has been on for actually 10 months now, is supporting. I'm going a bit quicker compared to what I would have liked, because maybe we have already heard about this. We know that the psychological impact is the most important one. It has marked us all in the different parts of Italy. We had to radically change our own lifestyle. We have had to pass from feeling we were free to move and to do whatever we liked to wondering whether that was possible or not and how long. So changing our way of going to the supermarket, of working, of meeting friends, even changing the way to have an aperitif with friends that was a remote aperitif, that was the only social event that we allowed ourselves to go for in the first wave particularly. But all this psychological impact was quite strong, and it emerged quite clearly in the requests from our citizens. In addition, we know about violence. This has also been reported by the WHO. Violence on women, particularly in the first period, had tripled compared to the last year. So let's just imagine the context and the heterogeneous requests that we had to tackle. We also had a lack of clarity and a number of aspects that did not let us understand what moment we were experiencing, and particularly the future perspectives. We know that also unemployment and economic situations were more unstable, and they actually also had an impact on suicide rates. In fact, this is also something that had a strong impact during the pandemic, and of course we had to deal with that. It is much connected to the loss of future perspectives. I'm trying to be quite quick because I know I wanted to show the testimony by a mayor from the province of Bologna, whom we helped. He made a thank you message for us, and so I wanted to present it together with some examples. However, these are the emotions and most disturbing thoughts that we were presented with during support requests: fear, anger, powerlessness, depression. So more or less all the things we have already listed in previous slides, that somehow I wanted, of course, to summarize in this slide, because for sure their impact is major. We also know that economic problems and general family difficulties that were exacerbated by that living 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, always together, where they definitely exacerbated these difficulties. And I must say that the intervention in the municipalities have helped us let the people feel less isolated during isolation. This for sure helped the citizens feel that someone was with them, working with them in their moment of isolation. I have repeated several times how important networking is, Due to limited amount of time, I will only bring some examples. We could think about all the realities we have followed, but of course it would take over one day only for municipalities. But I wanted to say that the experiences I'm bringing in are only examples that represent all the realities we have worked with. The colleagues following us can definitely identify with the examples I'm giving you, also because we all worked in the same way. We have all used the same methodology, and we have all got to the same important results. Hence, I want also to thank all the colleagues who have supported and helped us, without whom all these works would have never been possible for us. One of the examples I have already mentioned, so the networking, is the one we have made all throughout the Monferrato area, thanks to the activation of many municipalities in the area. And also an association from the territory with the Red Cross helped us, and the civil protection too. This project was also sponsored by the Piedmont region. There's a phone number, a hotline, where the civil protection operators, people could require support, and the triage was started. So depending on the support they needed, the group of EMDR psychotherapists was alerted if, of course, the psychological request was made. Again, here, the most important perceived themes were those that we have seen before: fear of being infected, anger, the deaths, the grieving relatives and friends, also specifically related to the society where these people were living. Another experience we've already talked about is the one with the municipality of Milan. The municipality of Milan and Crema specifically asked the EMDR Italy Association to support and help the staff from the municipal authorities of Milan. When you talk about staff, we are talking about all the subsidiaries of the municipality of Milan, about 17,000 employees, I mean. So you may understand how big the plan for intervention was to be. I must say that in the first phase, we activated a group of 11 EMDR therapists. Of course, we know that if required, we can always add other therapists, thus increasing the number of colleagues who work on the territory, thus taking care of all the requests made. We are noticing that if in the first phase the request was mostly connected to what COVID was bringing into their lives, in this second phase requests are different. I mean, we are moving into chronicized traumatic aspects, as Isabel was saying at the beginning, and the emergence of a number of critical vulnerabilities that are also linked to the history of life people bring in, particularly in this second phase of intervention. The interviews in the first phase, particularly the first phase went from April to end of July, and the second phase started in mid-October till the end of January. In the first phase, we had about 5 interviews each, sometimes more, but on average, we had 5 interviews per each, and the problems detected were those we already saw. The municipality of Crema, well, based on the different context, hence the difference in size compared to the municipality of Milan, they had a different approach. But again, here, support to staff. But why were they different? because they wanted to have a video that could let all people in the staff understand what answers could be to COVID. In Milan, we were activated during the two phases, the first phase in the first wave and now. This CREMA intervention was oriented towards seeing how the COVID experience was impacting in terms of vulnerabilities in the single people. Of course, we also were very successful in that. People were very happy. Sorry if I'm really quick, but I wanted to show so many things without being too long, because then you must all have the lunch break. Everyone was very happy. The effectiveness was seen in the tests that we often administer before and after the intervention, the IES, as colleague Maslovac was saying before, which is showing what time of emotional impact people are having in front of an event. Generally, as you saw in the previous charts, before treatment, so before EMDR support, there are quite often high indexes. After EMDR support, these figures drop, so people tendentially feel much better and they refer they are better. The municipality of Zola Val Pedrosa is in the area of Bologna, the one I referred to with the mayor before. In July, they organized this public initiative that was really a collective ritual. It was very touching for all the citizens and for all the healthcare operators. It was a way to thank the EMDR Italy Association and all the volunteers who had contributed during the pandemic. This municipality, however, did not stop there, because in September they organized a workshop for volunteers and citizens. And they are now requesting our support again. Within this event organized in July, they awarded the EMDR Italy Association thanking us for what we had done, but I want now share the mayor's words. I would like to start my video message to EMDR Italy with the word thank you. Thank you for your collaboration, for your support, which you gave to the Zola Predosa municipality already in the first phase of this emergency, in the first lockdown, when we noticed we needed to offer to our community an additional support in addition to the health and economic one. Psychology was important. We had to take care of those weights on our heart that COVID-19 has left us. So with great competence and availability, EMDR was with us. That's why I really want to thank them, because this meant offering a major help to all our territory. In these days, while during the second wave of the pandemic, we asked for additional help from EMDR Italy. So really, on my side, from the whole municipality of Zola Pedrosa, really thank you for what you have done and what you will do for our own territory. Thank you, of course, to the mayor. I wanted to change. Let's see if I can. Okay. Thank you, of course, to the mayor of Zola Val Pedrosa. These messages are always very nice after our own interventions. Very quickly, I wanted to show some of the materials that the different municipalities had produced. You could find these materials on the municipality homepage, where information was given on our services, what we could do and who you could talk to. So the modalities were very well highlighted in these materials, quite often also on Facebook pages that were municipalities where all the administration representatives even made videos and posted videos on their Facebook pages telling about psychological support and how things were doing. This is this was very important to feel close to the people on the territory. Of course, all these brochures were also distributed at the chemists. They were even bill posted publicly so that people could see them, maybe just going to buy some food or some medicines, and they were also available on some social channels. You see, we always have the logo of our association, but also the one of the municipality. You see, you have the main information here, and particularly it is explained how people can actually access this support. This is from Vercelli. These are the different brochures prepared by different municipalities. You see the logos from the association and the logos of the different municipalities. This is what I was telling you about with Vercelli. This was on the homepage of the municipality. It explained about the collaboration with us and how they could access it. We have one more short testimony. The mayor of Portogruaro. So here we are in Veneto, province of Venice. He actually sent a letter, a thank you letter, not a video in this case. This was to close our contribution and a number of articles too. I wanted, however, to close with this slide that reminds of the meaning of our work together. Henry Ford used to say that getting together is a start, staying together is a progress, working together is a success. So I can say that thanks to the 550 colleagues that have been with us to now, we have really been successful. Thank you. Thanks, Michaela, and thanks to the possibility of summarizing how you related to the municipal authorities with a general satisfaction, I would say, on the side of the administrators, as if they were somehow surprised, positively surprised, of course, by this collaboration. So we have put a lot at stake, figures, material. Let's take a break altogether. We'll resume works on EMDR pandemics, 10 months of interventions at 2 o'clock. A special message to everyone who's following us in the second room, the room with the simultaneous translation, everyone from Europe. Thank you very much. We'll be back at 2 o'clock. Thanks also to Mr. Barberis, who actually completed our idea on the relationship with the municipality of Milan. Thank you. And Mrs. Dr. Barnato will meet you back at 2. Thank you. Enjoy your meal.